us want to believe it, but people do disappear all the time.
These are some of the most chilling missing persons cold cases.
Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, two young women from the Netherlands, disappeared on April 1st of 2014 while hiking along the El Pianista Trail in Panama. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the pair. The young women arrived in Panama on March 15th. For 2 weeks, they toured around the country before heading over to Boquete Chinchiri, a small island in Panama where they stayed with a host family. Witness reports claim that prior to taking off on the Pianista Trail, the girls had brunch with two young Dutchmen before making their way into the Panamanian jungle, accompanied by a local dog. When the dog returned from the woods alone later that night, locals began to worry. It was at this time that the girls' families had stopped hearing from them as well. A search party went out to look for the pair. For over a month, there was no sign of Kris nor Lisanne, but then on the 14th of June, a local woman stumbled across Lisanne's backpack. The girls' phones were analyzed, and it was discovered that just a few hours into their hike, both of them had dialed emergency lines 911 and 112 multiple times, but due to poor reception, none of the calls went through. There were also many photos found on the girls' phones, one of which depicted what appeared to be a wound on the back of Lisanne's head. The discovery of the backpack and the phones prompted a wider search of the area. Eventually, the search party found items of the girls' clothing and then bones, some with skin still attached and some bleached completely. DNA revealed that those bones did in fact belong to Kris and Lisanne, but no one could figure out why or how the bodies had been dismembered or where the remaining body parts were. The tragic disappearances and deaths of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon remain an unsolved and incredibly perplexing mystery.
In 1990, a small group of fishermen went missing off the coast of South Carolina. It seemed as if they'd simply drowned, but then the families of the men began receiving mysterious phone calls. It was April 12th when the small ship, the Casey Nicole, took off from McIntosh County Pier in Georgia with 4 men on board. Billy Joe Neesmith was the captain. Along with him was his brother Nathan, his nephew Keith Wilkes, and their friend Franklin Brantley. But around 3 in the morning, Nathan got up to find that there was something very wrong with the boat. It wasn't smoothly gliding over the water, it was riding into it. The small crew realized that their boat was taking on water. They ended up needing to abandon ship, climbing into a raft. Nathan, however, got onto a small box, attempting to sail off to find help. Nathan was found alive 5 days later, but the other men were nowhere to be found. Just over a month after their disappearance, though, the families and owner of the Casey Nicole began receiving strange calls from a man speaking Spanish. He would simply repeat their names and phone numbers over and over, but on the last call, the mysterious man said one sentence in English: "I'm bringing them home." Then the connection was broken, and there have been no calls since.
On October 21st of 1978, an experienced pilot by the name of Frederick Valentich set out on a solo flight from Moorabbin, Victoria, Australia to the nearby King Island. In total, the flight should have taken an hour tops, but it seems as though it may have cost Frederick the rest of his life. It was a clear day, no clouds and little wind, so the flight to the island should have been smooth, quick, and easy, which it was at first. You see, partway through the journey, Valentich radioed into air traffic control to inform them that an unidentified aircraft had begun following him. Radio traffic control responded saying that there were no other aircrafts in the area. This is when Valentich started to become uneasy. He told air traffic control that whatever was following him was also messing with him too, hovering above and moving around his plane. A while later, he radioed in again and spoke his last known words, which were something along the lines of, "It's on top of me again, and it's not an aircraft." After that, his radio went silent for about 17 seconds before a horrible metallic screeching noise came through the receiver, and that was it. Frederick Valentich nor his plane were ever seen or heard from again. Of course, many people think he was abducted by a UFO, and many others believe he simply crashed into the ocean. Unfortunately, there's no way of knowing, but I think what we can all agree on is that it's quite strange that not one shred of evidence indicating what might have happened to Valentich or his aircraft has ever been found.
Ruthanne Ruppert was an experienced climber and adventurer. In August of 2000, she left her home in Florida to vacation in Yosemite National Park. I don't use the word experienced lightly. She was known to have accomplished some pretty intense feats. She once climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with a frozen foot, so a trip to Yosemite would have seemed like a walk in the park for her. She planned to join a backpacking group traveling 30 miles across Yosemite. Unfortunately though, on the morning she was to go meet up with the group, she woke up with an eye infection. She ended up heading to the clinic instead. She decided that she was still going to make the best of her trip though. She rented a tent cabin and went shopping for supplies, but after this, she completely vanished. The only clue left behind were her supplies, later found sitting in her cabin. There was no way she would have trekked out into the wilderness without them, and the search and rescue teams searched the park, but nothing turned up. It wasn't until 8 years later that Ruppert's backpack was discovered in Fireplace Creek, stuck in a drainage area almost 8 miles away from Curry Village, where she'd been staying. But how did it get there? Who was responsible? The case remains a mystery to this day.
Jennifer Kesse went missing in the afternoon of January 4th, 2006. Her home showed no signs of forced entry. In fact, there were no signs of anyone other than Jennifer having been there at all. It seemed as though, due to the placement of toiletries and clothing, that she had simply woken up, gotten ready for work, and then gotten into her car and left. However, she nor her car ever made it to her place of employment. Kesse was unfortunately never found, but her car was, in an apartment complex a mile away from her home. Police were able to retrieve CCTV footage that had captured the image of the man who had dropped the car off, but there was one major problem. The video did not show the man's face. You see, generally with CCTV footage, video is made up of images captured every few seconds. In this case, 3 seconds. The man in the video was seen walking behind a fence, and every shot shows his face hidden behind a different fence post. There is none of him in between the posts. Because of this, the police were unable to ID who one reporter called the luckiest person of interest ever. The case of the man's identity and the whereabouts of Jennifer Kesse have yet to be solved.
This next case really goes to show just how quickly and suddenly people can disappear, with no signs of distress at all. Just there one moment, gone the next. It's really unsettling. Thelma Polly Melton loved the mountains. She was a regular hiker and had spent years exploring the trails in Smoky Mountains, North Carolina. Polly was well known and loved in the local community, often volunteering at a senior home in town. In 1981, she set out on a hike with 2 friends. Given her experience, it should have been a straightforward, leisurely walk, but as they were walking, Polly sped up and went ahead of her friends. She went out of sight over a small hill. When her friends caught up moments later, expecting to see her on the other side, they were shocked to find that there was no sign of her, and there never was. Over a year later, a check in Polly's name was cashed in Alabama, but police couldn't definitively confirm it was her signature. Some believe Polly decided to run away. Her husband was ill, her mother had recently passed away, and there were rumors from her pastor that she might have been having an affair. Interestingly, the day before she disappeared, Polly asked to use the phone at the senior home where she volunteered, something she'd never done in her 4 years there.
On February 26 of 2015, a young man named Daylenn Pua informed his grandmother of his plans to hike the Mauna Lua Valley Park in Honolulu, Hawaii. He also said that he would be climbing the Haiku Stairs, or the Stairway to Heaven. His grandmother warned him against such actions, as the stairs were at the time in a state of complete disarray and therefore illegal to climb. Daylenn went anyways. Throughout his day, he sent multiple photos of his journey to his family through text, showing both himself and the beautiful hiking trails. Eventually, however, the texts stopped coming. Later that night, when Daylenn failed to return home, he was declared missing. His family immediately began looking through the photographs he had sent for any kind of clue as to where he might be. And then they came across the very last photo Daylenn had ever sent. In the photo, there was a man just off the trail that appeared to be hiding behind a bush. A man who very well might be the reason Daylenn never returned home. Unfortunately, the police are yet to identify the man, and Daylenn's whereabouts, as well as what might have happened to him, remain a mystery to this day.
Tara Calico was 19 years old when she went missing in Valencia County, New Mexico. On September 20th, 1988, she set out for a bike ride and never came home. Her family called the police and started a massive search, but they found no sign of her. Unfortunately, there just wasn't anything to go off, and the case went cold. But then disturbing clues started to pop up. In June of 1989, a Polaroid photo was found in a Florida parking lot showing a young woman and boy bound and gagged. The photo was sent to John Walsh's show America's Most Wanted, which aired asking the public for tips. Tara's mother saw the broadcast and was shocked. The woman in the photo looked just like her daughter, but police couldn't track down the subjects or the photographer of the photo. Then 2 years later, more unsettling photos surfaced, found at a construction site in Montecito, California. These photos showed a woman tied up who again resembled Tara. Her mother was convinced that it was her daughter, but unfortunately, they still weren't able to locate who had taken these photos, and her case has never been solved.
Cathy Moulton disappeared for the first time in 1971 and possibly once more in the 1980s. To this day, the whereabouts of Moulton remains an unsolved and incredibly baffling mystery. Now, on the afternoon of September 24th, 1971, Cathy Moulton was shopping with her father when she spotted a friend. With permission, the pair separated from Cathy's father and visited a nearby record store. They stayed there until about 5:30, which is when Cathy started walking back home. She was never seen again. Or was she? A few days after Cathy's initial disappearance, police received word that a woman matching Cathy's description had been seen in the passenger seat of a car being driven by a young man the night of her disappearance. Unfortunately, local authorities were unable to identify the man, and neither of Cathy's parents nor any of her friends could think of who it might possibly be. So of course the case went cold, but 10 years later, the police received their second lead. A local hunter in rural Maine called into the police station claiming to have found female human remains dressed in 1970s style clothing. But when the police arrived at the scene, the remains were nowhere to be found. A final search of the area took place in 2004, but unfortunately, nothing came of it, and the case went cold once more. If the hunter was in fact telling the truth, whether or not the remains belonged to Cathy, what happened to them and her remain a total mystery to this day. Did Cathy disappear twice? Who's to say?
On July 2nd of 1966, three young women, Ann Miller, Patricia Blough, and Renee Bruhl, visited the Indiana Dunes National Park. They were never seen again. The trio arrived at the park and were last seen on the beach, where they left their belongings before entering Lake Michigan. There was a massive week-long search involving the police, the Coast Guard, and volunteers, but no sign of the women. A number of witnesses claimed to have seen three women fitting their descriptions on a small boat, though. So authorities expanded their search to a 6-mile radius around the beach. Then more witnesses started to come forward, reporting that they'd seen the woman talking to an unidentified man in his early 20s operating a boat. Several theories have been proposed about their disappearance. All three women had connections to horse racing and were involved with guys who had criminal records. One of the women had reportedly lost a significant amount of money gambling on horses soon before they went missing, and people who knew the three told police they'd all been dealing with personal issues at the time. So I have to imagine if gambling debts had something to do with this, maybe they weren't killed or kidnapped, maybe they decided to disappear on their own accord. Well, me and Hannah aren't disappearing anytime soon. We're gonna see you in the very next video.
Yes, that we will. Stay safe, friends. Cheers.